we'll spend the next hour or so sharing with you what's new in Azure SQL Managed Instance. With that, let's go. My name is Niko Neugebauer. I'm a senior program manager with Azure SQL product group at Microsoft, and bragging and all these beautiful needless things is I'm just another IT guy who enjoyed way too much the Microsoft data platform. So after a couple of decades of working with it, I just flipped aside and joined the design of the product, which is Azure SQL Managed Instance, around a year ago. So I'm still fairly new, and I might not know a thing or two what I'm talking about. That's about it. That's the agenda. It's what is Azure SQL MI, to keep kind of all of us on the same page, because I do not want to assume that you already know some of the stuff, because I can go into certain depth, and let's keep us all kind of at least right on the same page. Let's talk about the amazing year 2021, which was for our product, for Managed Instance, and the section is into 2022 is the last one. So we have a brand. We, as in Microsoft, we have a brand which we call Azure SQL. So what is this Azure SQL? It's a conjunction of different database offerings. Database is in relational SQL Server based offerings. So on the left side, you can see the Azure SQL VMs or SQL Server virtual machines on Azure. You can at least potentially map them one by one with virtual machines you have in your data center or anywhere else, but those are not the regular virtual machines, because you will find a lot of things, especially that they will shine once you activate the extension, the SQL extension for the VMs. You will be able to do a lot of operation. You can even schedule backup and whatsoever, and do a better management for your VMs. On the other side, we have the platform as a service. This is basically where the platform as a service concept serves basically for hiding the complexity of the offer and giving you the access only to the relevant part, the part you care, the part you specialize. At least some of you are specializing in T-SQL and in extracting, manipulating, or just storing the information. So we've got the Azure SQL database offer. It comes with 3 flavors. First of all, it's the oldest one, the pre-provisioned, as we call it now. The second one is the serverless compute, which allows you to increase and lower the consumption of the CPU and memory dynamically, or as I call it, automagically. And then the last one, and not the least one, the most modern one, it's a hyperscale. It's not just the storage, it's the whole architecture. It's a absolutely brand new design for the SQL Server based offerings, and it's kind of like a future for us as a North Star orientation. And we believe if you are designing a cloud-born application, you should be considering Azure SQL database with hyperscale as a first choice. And then the product in the middle is the Azure SQL Managed Instance. We believe it's the best for modernizing existing application, and we are targeting the highest capability with SQL Server, the highest possible compatibility. It also comes as a platform as a service, so you do not care about operating system. You will not be able to see or use the operating system. You'll get an instance of a SQL Server, Azure SQL Managed Instance, and you will be able to execute. I don't really know how many, 95, 98, 99% of the usual task, but we strive to get on par. So I've worked, and I will be talking today about the Azure SQL Managed Instance. We've got two service tiers. it's general purpose and business critical. So general purpose, we believe that it's most suited for the most business workloads. Expect it to be this way. So it has a remote storage based on Azure storage, and you'll get a built-in high availability. So any DBAs around, or are you interested in knowing how we have the high availability? That was the question. I love a little bit of interaction.
Nobody wants to talk.
That's fine. No, that's fine. I talk to myself every time I need like a professional advice. I mean, I should ask myself.
Yes, yes. And somebody intelligent to talk without.
No, that part I have to skip. Unfortunately, that would not be the case. Anyway, so I'll tell you what it is. You should think about high availability in the general purpose as in similar to failover cluster. So you have one primary replica, and we have somewhere invisible for you and standby pool with different instances. And if something happens to the hardware or the software layer, whatever layer, or if when we are patching your instance, it has to go down, the one of the replicas from the standby pool will simply become visible, will attach itself to remote storage, and will carry on. So that's what we call a kind of like similarity with failover cluster. Then we have a significantly more faster offering, which is called the business critical. You need to consider it if you really need, especially the lower latency and very fast recovery, because we provide you a fully fledged synchronous, yes, it's fully synchronous availability group on steroids with 4 replicas. So 1 primary, 2 standby hidden, you will not be able to see. You will be able to query them from the primary to see, not query them, to see their existence, but you will not be able to access them. Why do we have these 2 high availability replicas standby? Because we designed the service to support 2 failures, 1 hardware and 1 software failure, because you will have a readable replica and a primary, and you will have the quorum. We will guarantee it in non-documented way. So it's kind of like we will still be able to carry on. So, and yes, you will have out of the box, you do not have to set it up, have a readable replica. We do support 16 terabytes. It's a huge number, because if you think like 4 replicas, 16 terabytes, when you provision that, that's 64 terabytes, right? Because you have 4 actual copies. It's in preview. We are looking hopefully very soon to put it into the general availability. And then you can also select different hardware SKUs. So the standard series, which gives you 5.1 gigabytes of RAM per vCore, and they are based on the Intel Broadwell CPU, and the Ice Lake CPU from Intel, the latest and the greatest, designed for the data centers, as far as I'm aware. A premium series, which gives you 7 gigabytes, and then premium series memory optimized 13.6 gigabytes of RAM per core, per CPU vCore. So it's 2.5 times bigger memory. It's kind of like, it's very nice if you need more memory and you do not want to increase your licensing costs. So both of these new offerings, which are still in preview, they are very popular. If you see one and you think about needing, my suggestion is go grab it before it will be too late. And we have the throttling and resource limits and the usual stuff. So we target with managed instance the maximum SQL Server compatibility, maximum possible, okay? And we target the overall the migration. If you are running directly SQL Server on your hardware or on Azure SQL VMs or any other VMs, we would love to get your workload now, later, eventually. So we are designing for maximum compatibility. And we have, as of today, the evergreen version of SQL, which means this is the last upgrade you ever make. You will forget what it means to upgrade your SQL Server. So the message here is simple and primitive in a way. If you enjoy, those wonderful one-year project where people will do nothing and then in the last couple of months starting screaming and their stakeholders and whatever, if you like to be awakened at 3 a.m. because there is no high availability or something went wrong, if you enjoy installing cumulative updates forward and maybe a rollback because something went wrong or rebuilding the master, there are people who enjoy that, but if you are one of those people, then managed instance is not for you. You will not enjoy it because we take all that experience away. You will need to use it. This is where kind of like the DBAs of the future, not a DBA, modern DBA should be moving into helping the customer or helping yourself to use the platform more efficiently, to configure it, because this is not fading away. And of course, we have newest features post the latest and the greatest in-market release, which means as of today, it's SQL 2019. We have features from the SQL Server 2022, which will come once the SQL Server 2022 will land. So they are already there. For example, the greatest and least functions, T-SQL functions, you'll find them on the managed instance and on Azure SQL database. Plus, we have some pretty exclusive Azure-only features, and I will talk about at least one of them. Actually, two of them today. Anyway, so industry-leading high availability will give you 4 nines financially backed up by SLA, premium support if you need it. We do take care of all your backups at high availability, etc., etc., etc. So if you care, of course you, but if you care as it's expected in the modern times with all these attacks, we have a lot of security offerings, and we do kind of like pretty much freak out about anything security related and ensuring that nobody, not even us, can even access your information if you will not authorize us. And we give you the tools to monitor and to prevent any possibility undesired consequences. So we have the full isolation, and people kind of like sometimes are wondering when they provision the managed instance, they say, oh, but there is no public endpoint. Yes, that's a security thing. So any good application, any good SQL server, as somebody who designed systems for customers for many years, I would prefer this database to be accessible only from the backend. And you might have something we used to call jumper, and I know people still call it a jumper. So a virtual machine in the VNet, which would be able to connect to the to your database, to your SQL server. That's what managed instance does out of the box. Of course, we do provide you a public endpoint if needed, but you need to set up the firewall, the network security group, a so-called NSG, for those of you who are working as architects on Azure, etc., etc. So that's about it, and let's go and see, like, it's not the last 12 months, to be honest, it's 2021. So in the first half of 2021, we launched 13 updates. You'll notice that there is a lot of stuff connected to Azure Active Directory and the integration and other Azure services. So we constantly improve them. One of them I want to highlight is a log replay service. For those of you who are, no offense, old enough or DBA minded, you will find the log replay service a very interesting service for migration to managed instance. This is what in the good old times and still available on SQL Server is called log shipping. So we allow you to ship your backup logs into blob storage, and then we'll simply replay them, allowing you to have a, an approximate, a closer, softer online migration. Sorry, I'm just checking on my phone on the messages, and there has been has been some. Anyway, so what was in the second half of the 2021 of the last year? These are the features. So we have, if you are an architect or you are provisioning anything and you want a easier provisioning, you should be using Terraform or Ansible. And we already G8 last September the Terraform support. We have all these different improvements that we, the new hardware series, the 16 terabyte support, general availability for general purpose service tier, the public preview for the 16 terabytes for the business critical, which is 4 times increase, very, very significant, etc., etc., etc. I'll go, some of these features, they will appear in the future slides. So kind of like, I'm not going into all of the details. Any questions on that?
No, thank you very much.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you. So I wanted to kind of like, this is what we have announced the last Ignite in November of the last year. So 16 terabytes, won't repeat myself, premium series, and we released in limited public preview the feature we will be looking into the depth today, which is a link feature for a SQL Managed Instance. We also released another feature I will mention today, also in limited public preview. You had to sign up for its usage, which is a Windows authentication. Additionally, we added the support for managed identities. So it is important to use managed identities if you are very mindful about security, because you can configure RBAC, so a very granular access control on the other services like Azure Key Vault or blob storage or whatsoever you can set up. So we do support running your managed instance with user-defined managed identity. Then we went into the general availability for support for Azure AD connection for linked servers, which means you can, if you want, and you should consider, that you can connect different managed instances with linked server, but you do not have to use the SQL Server credentials, SQL authentication anymore. You can use Azure AD and managed identities for that matter. So great scenario. Actually, just to mention that, because with the release of the Windows authentication, we do support a double, triple, whatever EPOL hops between the managed instance. So you can, using the Windows authentication, you can connect to managed instance, and then you can connect to other managed instance through linked server by using the same credentials. That scenario is fully supported and is it is already in general availability. Then the feature data exfiltration protection, or other name we are using, which is storage endpoint policies. So by default, and you should be aware, one of the critical security things is we do not limit the storage account you can access from your managed instance. And that means you can access the storage accounts even outside of your subscription and outside of your tenant, which is not very nice, to say at least, because that's an exfiltration possibility. So you can configure and set up the storage endpoint protection policies, where you can define the level of subscription of the resource group or even individual accounts, and you apply it on the subnet level. Of course, that's not the only policy you can apply. You can apply multiple policies on the same subnet, and you can also impose them on the whole subscription level, which I would love us, once we go into GA, maybe later, to have out of the box for the new instances, to limit them to the subscription where managed instance is provisioned. That would be kind of like a good security measure. Another announcement on the management side that we did was the mobility within the subnet. So there are, of course, the requirements, but you can, if you need to move your managed instance from one subnet into another, we are already allowing it. That's kind of like the news from the last Ignite, and that's what the presentation I discussed with Damir a few minutes before we kicked off. It was precisely focused on these details that we announced in the year 2021. And I wanted just to kind of like recapitulate of what we did, and I want to show you the amazing work that engineers are implementing, our leadership is leading, and I have a great group of PM colleagues. They drove it. This success, as far as I am concerned, and we do deliver more than 2 updates on average per month. And we are definitely not intending to stop in this year. So fasten your seatbelts. So let's go into 2022 and the real stuff that kind of like should be of your interest as of today. First of all, we announced in the end, like the 30th of January, the general availability for the backup redundancy. So you are able to change the backup redundancy for point-in-time restore. In just a couple of minutes, we'll go through the details and potential impacts you should be aware when doing this. And at SQLBits 2022, a month ago, we announced the public previews for these features. First of all is the link feature for SQL Managed Instance, the one that allows you to connect any SQL server running anywhere to Managed Instance. We'll go through many details in just a couple of minutes. The second one is a data virtualization with ADLS. Yes, you read it completely, read it and heard it completely right. We do allow you to reach out to Azure Data Lake Storage and to Blob Storage to read and to integrate very easily with Managed Instance. Remember, I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago that we do have this feature that have the exclusivity and the tight integration with Azure. That's one example. Another is the advanced notification for planned events. This one, we will not go into the depths in this presentation because 1 hour is definitely not enough, but you can set up a notification, for example, via email of when we are planning to update your service. For example, you can have like 24 hours before we will update, patch your managed instance, and notification. We do not have a mechanism of preventing it as of today, but you can take some of the decisions, for example, maybe suspending your ETL or moving it forward not to be impacted by the maintenance window. So that's something very useful. Azure SQL Database has it for quite some time. We are announcing the public preview and support for it. Then the hybrid service broker. So since the beginning, we had the service broker inside a single managed instance. Then we introduced the support of managed of the service broker between multiple managed instances, and the hybrid service broker is the one that allows you to, should you need it, to run the service broker connections between SQL Server running anywhere and managed instance. That's about it. The last feature listed on this slide, but not the least, is the Windows authentication. So you can use Windows authentication in public preview. I'll show you some of the details, what you need to do, but the documentation is very, very well written. It's written by a very well-known ex-MVP. She worked really hard for getting it right, and I have heard from multiple people who said that, like, oh, for something that includes the Kerberos stuff, that's a pretty impressive documentation. So try it out and let us know. The last but not least we announced is a general availability for the maintenance windows. So when you set up a managed instance, you can choose between a couple of options when we will be patching and updating your managed instance. I know those maintenance windows the choice is not that big, and the windows, as we define them, are pretty large, not to say at least. We're very well aware of this feedback, and we are looking in the future to improve them by making more choices and making them smaller, the maintenance windows. That's not a commitment, that's a kind of like a anticipation of what we would love to do. No ETA, but you are aware. If you will look at them one day and say like, I don't like it, I don't think it's fair, like, we are aware that you as a customer need more. We will definitely want to improve to this in the future. So any questions on that, or we can dive into the interesting stuff of the features? Just all right.
Please.
All right. So I see some known people. Anyway, hi Muir. That will stay in the recording.
No.
So let's go into the changing backup redundancy and its performance impact. That's a really important thing when you work with managed instances, that you understand what is the impact of anything or everything you do. Because as a DBA, you need to understand some of the internals, or as a developer, and not to do some sudden things. So what is a backup redundancy? As of today, we have three options: local redundant backup storage, zone redundant backup storage, and geo-redundant backup storage. They have, of course, different pricing, but for a point-in-time restore, you can select one of these types of the storages. And we allowed you to change after provisioning the managed instance. We did not allow you to change. And so what went into general availability is that you can change this. So you can say, like, I do not want that the blob storage will be just in one zone of a particular data center. You can say, for example, I want it to have a zone redundancy. So we have in the hero hubs, as we call them, in the big data centers, we have multiple zones, and you can change that. The copy of your point-in-time restore backup will be spread over multiple. So if one zone goes down, you will always have another zone when you can grab your backup. Or the geo-redundant backup means that the data will be replicated to a paired region. For those of you who are Europeans, as I would expect most of you to be, that means, for example, West Europe has a paired region, which is in North Europe. If you select the geo-redundant backup storage, every information with documented latency and delays, etc., will be replicated. So if, let's say, you're running your primary in the West Europe, and the West Europe goes down for some reason, in the Northern Europe you have your backup. You can grab it, restore it, do what is necessary. So what would you expect when you change these things? You'd expect that we would copy the data from local, let's say, if we're changing from local to geo. So basically we would establish a copy, we would replicate it, and that's the change. When you click apply, let me tell you, no, that's not what will take place. What will take place is basically described in 4 phases. Imagine we're doing this change from local to geo. So first of all, expect it in practice, as I have tested it and measured it, it's between 10 and 12 minutes. We'll need to provide the new storage type with all the security keys, all the replications necessary, etc., etc. That's done. Then, and this number 2 is something should be scaring you enough not to do this change during the working hours, because we will take a full backup of all your databases and you will feel the impact, because we need to guarantee that this new type of storage, whatever it is, in our case geo-redundant storage, has at least 1 full copy. So we will not move, we will not copy the old backups. We will keep on removing them. Let's say you defined the point-in-time restore policy for 7 days. Over the course of 7 days, we will slowly be removing one by one the differential and log backups, and we will keep on doing them to the new storage. And on the 8th day, you have the 7-day history here, but your older storage is not there anymore. So be aware. Schedule it. If you do not want, like unhappy customer, if you do not want to open a support ticket and we would point you that it's well documented, you should be aware. Be aware of that. Another thing is, if you're running something we call failover groups, like the active replication between the paired geo regions, so you have one primary, you have a secondary, so you can force the failover, or we can, for you to do the auto failover if something happens with one data center. If you go on the secondary and start changing the options, you save, it was fast, and you like, no impact. Once you do the failover, you know how you will pay, right? Number 2, here it is, the full backup. So be mindful when you change the settings and be aware of the consequences. Any questions on this feature? Any feedback? I see not.
All is gone.
That's disappointing. You either understand everything or you probably like relaxing like me on the vacation, like whatever this guy say, I don't understand his English. Anyway, so that's just basically a slide of how you do, where you go. You can define on a single database level, or you can, predefine for multiple. You can select and then go and configure policies. Next feature we're looking into is data virtualization. Anyone here working with ETL processes, importing data from the files or something?
Yes.
Okay. So you will be happy to hear that the data virtualization with ADLS gives you an opportunity. We talk mostly, and even in my slides, you'll find mostly mention of 2 formats, even though we do support 3 and it's documented. So if you're using Parquet file, if you're using CSVs, and there is some, this part is tricky, documented. For JSON, you need to do a little bit of more of, let's say, I'll call it belly dance, but they're all supported. So you can use your line of business application, you can use your data tools, or our Power Platform, with the best example being Power BI. You can run a simple T-SQL query, reading the data stored in ADLS generation 2 or the blob storage. So using the familiar T-SQL syntax, it will help you to load the data directly into managed instance. And if you wish, and if the latency is not your worst enemy, you can keep them, and we'll go into the example. You can create an external data table, basically creating external table and keeping data in CSV, or better actually with the compressed columnar Parquet format, and you can query it very easily. Or, you can use SQL Managed Instance as a proxy. So I wanted to share with you 3 scenarios I consider really, really interesting and cool. So first of all, bring data easily into SQLMI. Forget about using maybe even the data factory. If you have the data, or maybe use the data factory to copy the data into blob storage or ADLS Gen 2, and then, just enjoy it. You can do the integration very easily. You can go well beyond those 16 terabytes that we do support in both our service tiers and expand it to petabytes, whatever bytes. We do not limit you number of the storage accounts you can use. So the other one is my favorite one. Actually, these 3 of them, I really love these ideas, is use it as a single version of truth for multiple SQLMIs. If you are ISV, you need to copy the same data into a table for every SQL Server instance, or in our case, managed instance. If it's okay, you can point multiple managed instances directly to the same account. So think about this. If you're doing the data warehousing as the confirmed dimensions, the one dimension that serves for multiple schemas, for multiple fact tables. So that's a great opportunity. And then the last but not least is hot and cold. So you can actually, by using, and I will try to show you an example what I did with the help of Data Factory, you can grab the data which is in your table, store it as with the help of that Data Factory, let's say in CSV or in Parquet, store it on blob storage, define an external table, and you have this hot data and you have the cold data, which is making it complete. And by defining the view, overarching view on these tables, it will look like fine. So by that, you can access the hot data from the local storage or from remote storage, which is integrated in the managed instance. And that very infrequently, the archival data, maybe like 9080s data that you store like twice a month, somebody is accessing, they don't care about the latency. Oh, that can be stored on the blob storage. It's out of the scope, but I want you to be mindful that backups will not take this data, right? So you will need to ensure that you're running the replication of this data, the copying, or you're using the geo replication for this storage in order to make sure that you do not lose it. And the versioning of it will be another issue. It's not only like all the flowers everywhere, right? But we are all intelligent people. So that's enough of words. Let's do this. So here we go. I have 2 files, 2 little demos. I am here connected to my managed instance here. And what you need, because we call it a polybase, you need to ensure that the feature polybase enabled is configured to be true. As you can see, like that's the traditional SP configure. Then, of course, if you have no master key, you need to create it. And next thing I already did, I created database scope credential, which I call this, and this is my SAS key. Of course, you do not need to have my SAS key. You will generate your own. You can see, there is a limitation. Of course, you create it for certain dates, etc., etc. Then I will create an external data source pointing to some data. That's the data example we're using in our documentation, so you can run it easily. And then I can go to my data, and let's say number of COVID cases for 2020, and you can see the statistics. And if you want to include the actual execution plan on it, you can see that we are doing a parallel, that's the errors, remote scan. So that's not a local storage, that's remote storage. That's precisely this storage account that we are using. It was not that slow, I would say, the query. I can even go and, and query a particular file or partition for the data and count the information. I can also go and use a wildcard format for that. So you can see, and of course this one will run slower, but if you're using something with Synapse Analytics, you should be able to recognize, and you can see how many rows I have there. It's not a very small number of them. So you can also get the file path information, and we already allow you to extract some of the folder, the full path, etc., of the concrete file name you are accessing. It's not the end, it's just the beginning. That's the initial public preview. I'm happy to share, we already got some feedback on this feature, and improvements are coming. For example, I can here list all the file path, all the diverse file path. So in this case, I'm sorry, I'm just extracting the year and the month from the file path. Also, this one is pretty important, especially if you have a pretty dynamic loading procedures. This one was introduced, still remember, in 2012, SQL Server, describe result set. Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry, I cannot use the describe result set when I have the actual execution plan. That was the error message. So I use it a lot as a database professional. So you can see this is what it will return to me if I run this query. So it will return vendor ID with this varchar, varchar, depending on how you call it, and date time too with the 7 of the precision and an integer column. So 3 columns. You can discover this. It's very useful. Another one, tip I would love to give you is I'm running basically a similar query, right? But you can specify that's also 2012 improvement with result sets. We just do not require you the words result set. But I query the information, and if I already know the format of the data, how it will land, it's better to specify the expected result set. That would be a little performance improvement, because we will not spend time on determining what we should be returning. So let me see, I think I dropped it. Yeah, so let's create an external table. So you see, it's create table syntax, and I'm pointing to this conjunction of Parquet files, to this hierarchy. So create table with, and I specify the file format. I already created the data source and the location. And after that, I query it like a regular table. So my customer will not be even aware where do I store the information. It's not the idea to hide, but it hides the complexity of this. Another thing I want to show you is that you can create, and you should be creating, the open role set statistics. Currently, like on some other Microsoft offerings in their initial iterations, we ask you to do that manually. So you will need to run the SP create open role set statistics in order to get the statistics. And it will help you to get a better memory grants, and in the end, of course, performance. You will need to drop them, of course, by yourself. If you're running the failover group configuration, we will not replicate them. So you will not, every time you do a failover between the regions, you will need to recreate the statistics. That's a current limitation, etc., etc. And you can also create the regular statistics on the table if you created an external table. Will not run this one because it's a huge data set, and scanning it and calculating will take some time. Any questions on that? It's kind of like, I assume everything is fine. If you feel like you have a question, I'm very welcome to hear. Please unmute yourself, and or if you feel more comfortable writing feedback, I'm also very open to to read and to answer your or to take your feedback. Anyway, so what I did here is created another credential to another blob storage. That's my blob storage, and wanted to show you, just for you to be aware, that if I run the same thing, a similar thing, but against a CSV file in the format CSV, it will say, wait, we can determine in Parquet, but you will need to use a with clause because you will need to specify, right? So that's the same select statement, but I need to provide, and that's I was not very precise, as you can see. That's the same statement, and I get the data just because I specified the type of the data I am expecting. This is requirement as of today for the CSV, and I can go, I don't know if it will work, but I'll try at least, because I believe yes. So you can see the second column is in integer, and this is actually, I'm correcting it, at least for one column, and let's call it denominator big int. Let's see. And of course, it's not a guarantee because I'm not reading all the data. I'm reading just the top 10 rows, but let's see, it kind of works. So please follow the best practice. Do not go into varchar 50 or nvarchar 100 or whatever there it is. Define each of the data type correctly. So what I will do in this example is I will create a view on this, and I'm kind of worried that I will not get in time to show you the other features which are I think important, but I will just explain through the demo. So I'm defining the CSV with the field terminator of a comma, and I create this remote vaccination data table, which is pointing to my source data of CSV. Okay. If I query it, I'll get this 81,000 rows. In total, 81,210. And then I'll copy it into my local, I create a local data table. I'll create a view which will contain the data which will be marked for removal. And let's say it's around 2 years ago. It's not the same idea, but I just want to be mindful about time. Then I will create a table for the called data. This is called a delta table in my case, and a store procedure for removing the data from the local view. If I did not delete it, so there is no data for removal, but there is a data in vaccination data, precisely 2,977 rows. And that's a remote data, because I already executed it. So you can see that's a remote scan that I did. And in local data, I do not have 81,000 rows, 81 plus thousand rows. I have this number because that's the data which is here in this remote table. And by creating a view over the local data and the remote, this delta data, when I run this query, you can see that I join I don't have the indexes, not the best practice, but it serves for the example. I have this local data, and I have a remote scan. And by using this pipeline in ADF, which I executed just like a little bit 2 hours ago last time, but I can execute it again. It doesn't really matter. I copy the data from the source of the hot data into this vaccines delta CSV file, and then I run my store procedure that I defined in my script. Of course, you need to guarantee the transaction consistency, etc., etc., etc. But just giving you an idea. I'm not even waiting for the result. And if I query this view, I will find out that I have this number of row 81,210, and that's exactly in. No, I did something wrong. V hot code. Yeah, because I executed it the second time right now. Sorry for the confusion. Yes, but it works actually, and if you're interested, I'm happy to share this file and the procedures to set it up so you can try it out. Any questions on that? Oh, we have like 3 minutes, or maybe Damir, how much time do I have?
You can take with how many time you want.
Oh, then just 3 minutes. Kidding.
Okay.
Okay, so link feature in SQLMI. So what is it? It's a replication technology based on a new version of distributed availability groups. So you can replicate the data. Imagine you have a customer who wants to read your data and they want to access your primary, and you say like, oh no, I don't give you access to my primary. They're like, oh, then spin up a replica. And you go and spin up a replica and they say, no, we do not like the latency. We want you to have we are in Australia and please put a replica near us, and you do not want to manage it. So you can spin up a managed instance and using this link feature easily establish a link. And the read-only workload will be directed at this distributed secondary, and yeah, that's about it. Another scenario is you can finalize this replication by using a failover, and that's the greatest feature, the most online thing you can get for migrating to managed instance. So in this way, you can guarantee almost as close to online. Somebody's want to say something? No? A question? No. Okay. So
Now
that's
some music.
Yeah, I liked it, and it sounds like a car to me. So link feature, we are supporting this 2019 and 22, but we're happy to share that we will be including 16 and 17 support. We do support Enterprise Edition, and support for other edition is planned. That's what we are sharing. Support 5022, no public endpoints, of course not. So think about the VPN, whatever is needed to set it up. The underlying technologies is an updated version of distributed availability groups. You will not need Windows Server failover cluster from 17 and above versions, but if you're running 2016, you will need to have on your server Windows Server failover cluster configured. And you can mix and match different SQL servers for that. So cutover is happening in the way. I'll show you the demo. I mean, like, why would you care about the slide where, if you do, I'm sorry. So let me go and show you the demo. Because I can, hopefully, because it will hopefully work. So here we go. Let's go here a full screen, and you can see that I am here running a SQL server, which is version 15, right? and I run here a managed instance. So I am connected here to my SQL Server, to my 2019. I don't have a database here. So let's create, let's use a master and let's create a database and bump up a little bit of its data and log size. After that, what I will do is something you should never be doing in the real life. I'll take a full backup overriding. Why? Because when I am creating an availability group and I need to be using a direct seeding, or actually not in only direct seeding, but one of the requirements is to have the full backup done in order to control the LSN chain. So you need at least 18.11.1. That's the version you will need of the Management Studio. Right click, Azure SQL Managed Instance link, replicate database. Next, the requirements, the trace flag as of the feature is public preview, we still require, availability group requirements, all this stuff. We select the database. You can see that this one is full backup is required, but I'm meeting here requirement because I already did it. Next, I need to sign into my Azure account. I already did it, so I just point yes, I'm signing in, and then we will extract the list of your subscription, resource groups, and the respective managed instance. So I will go into my dear colleague or owner of the managed instance of link feature for managed instance, Danny, resource group, and I will it will list all the managed instances that we have. It will not take that much time in your case because product group for managed instance does use a couple of different managed instances, and I will select the pilot GP01. I will need to establish a connection, and I need to log in with a user account that with the respective authentication that has a lot of privileges, such as creating new database, right? It will not be like a regular account. I logged in, then you have these different options which are not really updatable, but at least we list them. We have we give you opportunity to edit your server IP, which should be accessible from Azure. We do this because if you have a multiple IPs on your server, we might, select the wrong one out of 3, 5, whatever you have. So we give you this opportunity, and we will create a availability group and over it a distributed availability group, and you can define their names. I do not care. I click the finish, take some time, because it's not only the joining the SQL server to managed instance, it will be also a replicating. So we will do the full direct seeding. If you have a 10 terabytes database, you started this process, it takes a lot of time. My answer is yes. Yes, I understand that creating a snapshot for direct seeding and replicating the data, and maybe you have a pretty, slow link, that will take a lot of time. But contrary to log replay service, it's basically you can, even if it's suspended, you can resume it. Okay, let's go and see on my managed instance. It takes some time. Here we go. It's already here. That's my SQLMI demo. So what we do next is let's switch on the SQL Server side to it. Let's create a table. I usually call it test source. If you ever read any of my blog posts on the managed instance tech community, you would like test source again. Okay, so, and let's, start pumping the data. Of course, I'm not using any transaction. I want just to hammer it, right? So let's go. I started it. Let's switch to the managed instance and let's ensure that we are correctly connected. So you can see my server name is a managed instance, right? That's the name of my instance. That's the DNS for the virtual cluster, and that's .database.windows.net. Let's see if we can write into this database. Oh no, my gosh, that's a read-only, right? That's a read-only mode because we're replicating to it. That's like availability group works. And let's go and get the maximum IDs replicated, 10K. So 11K. Wow, it replicates the information. You can see the number is changing as I'm picking it up. What will happen if I stop this replication, go over, execute once, it's 14,340, 15,05, it stopped. I have a pretty big distance. That's in Australia, and that's in my, I think, no, this one is in Australia and this one is on the West Coast. So it's kind of like a serious replication, but you can see it's still replicated, depends on your requirements, and maybe they are satisfied and you find maybe they're not, and maybe you should consider something else, but we believe it's a great technology. So let's do the migration. Failover database. Once again, a welcome screen. We need to sign in. I am already signed in. Then we will need to select the failover type. Like in availability groups, we have the option of doing a plain manual failover, and we need to confirm that workload is stopped. Because I will not change the status of my database. At least we will not planning it for now. You need to ensure that you're not inserting. Whatever you use a firewall, we trust you. This one is synchronous failover. This one is with data loss, right? For you who are aware of availability groups, let's do the planned one. Next, I will delete both of the availability groups, the regular and the distributed one. And then I will do the following. The replication through the distributed availability groups runs in asynchronous mode. We'll switch to synchronous, and we will do up to 3 attempts of verifying the log sequence numbers on both sides, as if like, oh, I forgot, I still inserted information. So we will not fail you over, because we kind of like we want to ensure at the maximum that the failover is correct. So we're switching right now from asynchronous to synchronous, and then we will verify if the first attempt is successful. There will be no need for the second and third. This might take some time. For that, voila, here we go. Execute it, and if I go and check on my database status, I see that it's already in read-or-write mode. Okay, and not to say that you cannot create databases in parallel while you are still replicating. You can actually still have the other databases in read-write mode or many links. We support up to 100 managed instance links per managed instance. So that's
failover back.
Can you fail over back? That's a good question. So we have already announced that we will support this scenario with SQL Server 2022 only. And yes, we will allow you to fall back. Will we support it on 19? No. On 17? No. On 16? No. On 14? No way. So 2022 will be the requirement. But yes, we will allow. And we will allow you also to take a backup from the managed instance database and restore it to 2022. So you do not have to use the link to fail over. I mean, of course, your restore will be different time, but you can maybe initialize a different database out of it, etc., etc.
We can restore it to 2019 too. I guess it is possible. Huh?
Yeah. So you can go from the managed instance to 2022. That will be the only possibility. So important thing to be aware, we do not require availability groups. We do not require you to have a multiple node systems. And there is a important limitation you should be aware. You can blame me in the first instance, please, that we do link on per database level. It means that if your solution has a multiple databases, you will need to establish multiple links. That's the current preview version limitation. Yeah, I felt your disappointment. I really did. I'm not being ironic.
I mean, one of the adults of availability groups is to put the logical databases together. But okay, I understand it's a technical limitation right now. It
yes,
should be.
Do not take any conclusions out of the words that I'm saying, but take them as of this moment it is. Does it mean that in next wave, next month, next week, next year, we will change it? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying as of today, this is how it looks like.
Okay.
It's I want to say something about my team, even though I'm like about to make 1 year. In 1 month, I will be making 1 year in Microsoft and with my team. Not only engineers who are insanely competent, but the product managers are also very competent. We do talk to people, to MVPs, to anyone interested, not anyone, but those who can provide us good feedback. If something is not up to your liking, there must be some good reason for that. It's like not, I used to hear, even when I was an MVP for over a decade, I used to hear the words about the incompetence and not understanding. It's more complicated than that. This is what I want to say. So this is like the information, the answer I gave you on the migration to back of going back scenario. That's 2022. And yeah, all the stuff, slideware. It's not just slideware, it's important, very useful information, but we are out of time. This is actually an important thing that we are sharing, that if you're using failover groups, we are we do not support this scenario as of now, but we definitely are interested in improving this, because failover groups is a very, very important item for us. We love them very, very much. And so you can replicate one by one, multiple up to 100 databases to a single managed instance. You can replicate from multiple SQL servers. This can be on-premise, this can be on Azure SQL VM, this third one can be on some other cloud. And we also allow the deconsolidation, as you have like one big, let's say, on-premises server, and you can spread it over multiple managed instance. Last thing I want to tell you about Windows authentication and basically how it works. So you will need to set up a sync of the trust into the Kerberos realm of your Azure, of your Active Directory. So you will sync it into Azure AD, and once you will authenticate, you will send an encrypted Kerberos ticket. So what we did is we made the managed instance recognizing the format of the Kerberos ticket. It will just simply go verify if this one is in the Kerber's realm, this information is synced, and then we will return to you Azure AD token, which will serve you for authentication to the managed instance and or multiple managed instances if you're using the double hops to jump through the, for example, linked servers, or using transactional replication or service broker whatsoever. Of course, you will need to set up the, the authorization on each of those respective managed instances. And with that, thank you so much. Sorry that I ran for 15 minutes over, but that's the story of my life. I'm always late. No, I'm kidding. I'm never late. Just today. No, I'm kidding again. Thank you so much. I'm happy to take feedback and questions if you have any.